We're here in deepest Cornwall today, and I'm talking with Sue. We decided that we would talk about the Freedom Programme, and the book is new to both of us in a sense. Neither of us has really read it beforehand, and so what we're going to do is just talk about it chapter by chapter, with pauses in between, so that it doesn't become just too long. What more can we say about it? My name's David Eggins. I work as a facilitator for temper domestic violence, delivering courses with violent and abusive and aggressive men and women.
I'm Sue Parker Hall. I'm a psychotherapist and a counsellor and author of Anger, Rage and Relationship. And I work individually with people, men and women, with rage issues. And my approach is a non-gendered one, which is why I'm quite keen to have a look at the Freedom Project and
what it all means, in a sense, or what we construe that it means. Yes, and our program with perpetrators is also, or with people with abusive behaviours, I think is a word I prefer much more to perpetrators, because the word perpetrator implies that somebody is guilty of a criminal offence, which in some cases the people will have been tried and found guilty, and in many other cases, of course, they're being made perpetrators by accusation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is the book that we've been looking at, and we started looking at it probably about 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour ago.
Yeah.
Chapter 1 is the introduction. So we'll make some progress with that. I don't know whether you want to talk a little bit first, Sue, or whether I'll talk a little bit, but we'll see how it goes, shall we?
Okay.
So what strikes you from your first reading of this, Sue?
Well, the introduction is quite tantalising in a way. The author had a revelation and said that she found herself colluding with every man she'd ever worked with, but didn't say how. And she also talked about information she felt she had that no one else that she was working with had. And so I'm intrigued about that too. And she mentions her understanding that most women who are abused have no idea of what happened to them. So I found those three things tantalising and interesting. And the other thing that struck me, which has often been a criticism I've had of the Duluth-based model, the model based on radical feminism, is the men are not allowed to discuss their personal circumstances. They're not allowed to tell their story. And to my mind, anger and rage issues are all about trauma, and the only really long-lasting solution is to actually tell the story, to
begin to move that through their system a little bit.
That's a lovely way of putting it. Yes, precisely.
Yeah, I think those were some of the things which struck me as well, that I'm going to use the word perpetrator, although I don't like it, but just for the pure convenience of it, that a perpetrator is a perpetrator and a victim is a victim. And of course, part of the problem which we see is that at any particular given moment, either might be victim or perpetrator. And that if we're working with a perpetrator, then that perpetrator has almost definitely been a victim at some time in the past in their life, and that the emotional memories of the victimhood which they've experienced also direct, if you like, the emotional take which they have on all subjects. And so I think without exploring the victimhood of the individual, then there's going to be precious little change brought about. That would be my take on it as well. Yeah.
What struck you from looking at the introduction?
That basically, what's she called? Pat Craven had been a probation officer for quite a long period of time, and she seemed to be saying that she'd worked with quite a number of men who were murderers. And if we take the statistics of that time, which she mentions a little bit later on, I think in chapter 2, that 112 women a year are killed by their partner or former partner, And there are something like 52 counties in the country, and I don't know quite what area a probation service covers, but if there are 52, then that would almost imply that there are like 2 murderers per county per year. And so if there are 2 murderers per county per year going into the prison because of the murder that they committed, I'm assuming that there are only going to be 2 per year coming out of the probation service or coming out via the probation service. And so it sounded to me as if there would be quite a considerable difference in the exaggeration which I would perceive her putting on the number of male murderers that she found.
It didn't quite resonate.
It didn't quite resonate with me, no. In our experience, I'm not aware that we've worked with any man that's been a murderer out of more than 1,000 men that we've completed work with. We've completed work with just over 100 women, and I am aware of at least one of the women that was a murderess, interestingly enough. So goodness knows what that means, but you know, our experiences differ quite significantly there. So. So the introduction also tells us that Pat was running, or Pat's organisation was running perpetrator programmes which lasted 1 weekend. And I can go along with the intensive format of that because I think one of the big difficulties with the Duluth model is that with 26 to 32 weeks being a fairly standard requirement, that men just drop out for a whole list of reasons. And not only that, the facilitators also can't manage to be maintained over that period of time through their own illness and sickness, and so facilitators just get changed around. So I think the model of working at weekends, which is one which we've also adopted and been working at for 25 years, I think that's constructive. However, what sounds to be happening is that these are big groups, and I'm quite aware that the probation service likes to work and on the IDAP program, which I imagine was what Pat worked on for some time. That got abandoned in about 2012, and I imagine that that was because the outcomes from it were very, very poor indeed. And or it might be according to the fact that that the probation service sort of outsourced its much of its service to the CRCs, the community rehabilitation companies, and they picked up and ran a different program called Building Better Relationships. And the latest reports I was reading from the HM Inspectorate of Probation or Prisons or CRCs was saying that the outcomes from that are pretty abysmal as well. So I think the guts of it is that the model which has been being used for a considerable period of time is absolutely rife with failure. One of those failures was, as Pat was quite correctly trying to observe, that you need to have work which is intensive, which men can complete, but if you have large groups of people, then you obviously can't explore what's going on. And a client that we've recently had who went to a community-based accredited program where he was one of 16 individuals, the report at the end of this said that he had really not taken part in the way which they would have liked him to have taken part. And when I do the mathematics and work out that in a 2-hour passage with 16 people there, his opportunity for taking part would have maybe been about 5 minutes if he'd been one of these sort of get my bit in kind of people, which he wasn't. And so without being invited to speak, his whole input would be very, very minor indeed, because that was the way that he'd been brought up, in a sense, to be seen and not heard, which was clearly what he was still doing at the age of 35, 36, 37, but nevertheless a highly intelligent man. An interesting thing, yeah.
It is. Well, one of my criticisms of the Duluth model was that it was a one-size-fits-all. And it was also that it was a kind of program of political indoctrination. It wasn't evidence-based or practice-based. And one of the prime indicators of that is that it just didn't change or develop.
Yeah.
over the years. It stayed the same.
I think that's right. 2012, I think it was, Louise Dixon produced a very trenchant paper which said that there was no evidence based on what they were doing, and was actually calling for the Duluth model, which was respect, which was what respect was accrediting, that it should be simply abandoned.
Yes.
And there were other papers around the same time which were really calling for the same thing. However, it has somehow survived.
And we're both curious to see the echoes of it or not.
Yes, that's
in
right.
this Freedom Project.
Yes, and the Freedom Programme picked up a good deal of criticism from Respect for reasons which I can begin to understand. That if you're working with a large group of people, all you're attempting to do really is to give them new vocabulary or something like that, so that they will learn the words, but they won't learn the music which goes with it. And with that kind of analogy, I think the difference between the one weekend where they worked and the 2 weekends where we work is that we're also bringing the people into contact with the music. So it's not really about words at all. It's about all of the music, so that they can play the whole the whole orchestra will be brought into play. Rather, the orchestra will be brought into use rather than just the words which somebody's remembered of the poem or something like that.
So shall we read on?
Yes, let's read on and then see where we go from